Koei's Romance of the Three Kingdoms, inspired by the classical Chinese novel of the same name, which itself is based on the historical events of ancient China, is one of the longest-running strategy series in gaming. And the more recent but very prolific Dynasty Warriors series, also published by Koei Tecmo, follows the same story with fast-paced action gameplay instead. Dynasty Warriors is developed by Omega Force. This unique style of over-the-top large-scale battles where single characters wipe out thousands in mere minutes has itself spawned its own brand that they call Musou in Japan, which has risen further in popularity through collaborations that have brought about spin-offs like Hyrule Warriors and Dragon Quest Heroes. While Omega Force is mostly known for these Musou games, their earliest titles bear little resemblance to their current work. In this episode, we're going to take a look at what is considered the first ever third-person cover shooter, Winback. Third-person shooters surged in popularity beginning around late 2006 with the release of Gears of War on the Xbox 360. It was further reinforced by series like Uncharted and Mass Effect. These games make up a sort of subgenre that you might call a cover shooter, where combat largely revolves around moving between spots of relative safety, taking cover either automatically or with the tap of a button, and popping out to fire at enemies. But way back in 1999, Omega Force pioneered the cover shooter concept with Winback on the Nintendo 64. It's pretty obvious that this is a game that publisher Koei had hoped would ride the wave of wildly popular espionage-themed games like GoldenEye and Metal Gear Solid. But despite generally good reviews, it never achieved the same legendary status. Terrorists have taken over the controls to some satellite weapon, and the only people who can stop them is the Special Covert Action Team. You play as Jean-Luc Cougar, and you gotta win it back. Win back the satellite thing. Covertly. Winback tries to do the whole ex-military special unit crazy boss troop thing, but fails to build them up as characters. And check out the life meter. Nope. Certainly haven't seen anything else like that before. While on the surface, Winback appears to be a poor man's Metal Gear, its cover mechanic was well ahead of its time, and makes for a game that is very unlike anything else of its generation. In fact, it would be a stretch to call this a stealth game. While there are some stealth elements, this is unquestionably a game about shooting lots and lots of bad guys. Much like modern cover shooters, you stick to cover with the press of the A button. Holding R readies your weapon, and pressing the A button again fires. Release R and you'll return to cover. Though this sticky cover mechanic also works on low-lying cover, I've found that it was kind of problematic, and it's much easier to simply hold the Z button to stay crouched behind low cover, and release to pop up and fire. Overall, it works surprisingly well. And it's fascinating to see such an early implementation of what is now a tried and true modern gameplay mechanic. Now, since the N64 is of course only a single stick console, Winback uses a lock-on system to compensate for aiming difficulties. This sort of makes me think of the aiming system you may have seen in Rockstar games, where a generous auto-aim zeroes in on the body of the nearest threat and follows. If you want to get a headshot, it's not too hard to tilt up just a bit. Much like Resident Evil, you can't move while aiming. A-OK in my book, though I know it's not to everyone's taste. Jean-Luc might be more clever than his opponents, but he's hardly any stronger. Bullets tear you to shreds in seconds, and medkits aren't nearly as common as you might hope. Coupled with extremely infrequent checkpoints through fairly lengthy levels, I have to admit that the latter quarter of the game pushed me over the brink of rage. But I did finish. Depending on your tolerance for older 3D action controls and unforgiving deaths, Winback may or may not be for you. Over a year later, a fairly faithful port was released on the PS2, featuring significantly sharper graphics and none of the infamous N64 fog. I also noticed that the enemies seemed to be a bit more trigger happy. But thankfully, checkpoints are much more frequent. It also has some spectacularly hilarious voice acting, which more than anything sort of makes me wish that this was the version that I'd put my time into.
I can't believe they made such a crazy weapon in the first place. Then to have it stolen by a bunch of terrorists, what a joke!
The PS2 version is also available on PS3 through the PlayStation Network. A sequel was released for PS2 and Xbox, though rather than Omega Force, Winback 2 was developed by Kavia, best known for games like Drakengard. At the end of the day, Winback doesn't really do anything special enough with its presentation or controls to set it apart from the more evolved cover shooters of today. But if you have a soft spot for older shooters on the N64 or PS2, and can weather a healthy dose of frustration, it does still play surprisingly well overall, and is, if nothing else, an interesting look at how a simple idea from an unexpected developer made a huge impact.